she was deep in thought, feeling that Ura didn't deserve him. Breaking the silence, the girl greeted Dogu and reminded him that it was nearly lunchtime. Elle suggested that if Dogu had no plans, they could have lunch together. Looking questioningly at Ura, Dogu asked if she meant him. The girl smiled, confirming she had come to meet him and have lunch. Realizing there was a reason behind her visit, Dogu playfully asked if she wanted to eat or get married at the same time. The unexpected question left the girl momentarily stunned. But just a moment later, like her mother, Ura composed herself, smiling, and replied that they could eat first and then get married. As she sank into her memories, the girl recalled how everything in that house had been hers since the day she arrived. Everything in the WJ retail family belonged to her. She was always showered with gifts during the holidays and had never felt inferior to anyone. Her wealthy, tycoon father ensured she received all the love she needed, along with the ideal, socially imposed image of a family. But for Ura, it was all about furthering her legacy, and she wasn't going to let anyone else have it, especially not her obsessive, perpetually disgruntled sister, Dogu. Elle remembered the day they first met. She'd been angrily scrolling through social media when she heard a pleasant male voice. She turned to see a tall, handsome brunette who immediately apologized for being late. Unlike anyone she'd met before, he was captivating. Looking into his eyes for the first time, Ura realized he had everything she wanted. They spoke for hours, discussing various topics. Ura mentioned how she believed marriage should be between people of the same status who got along well. Dog accepted her offer of coffee, but when he set his mug down, he told her bluntly that he wasn't thinking about marriage. Shocked, the girl jumped up and questioned him. Standing from the table, Dog said he had no choice but to attend this meeting because his mother had requested it. As she tried to change his mind, Dogok cut her off, saying he didn't want a political marriage. Even though his words hurt, Ura still found him irresistible. She decided then and there that Dogo Ayo would be her husband, no matter what. But as she thought back to that day, Ura struggled to understand why Yu and Dorguk were together. Why had they kissed that day? Why had he gone to her family's house and asked for permission to marry Yu on the same day? Seeing them hold hands, Ura couldn't keep her composure. She was filled with confusion and frustration, wondering why he chose Yu over her. Clenching her trembling fists, Ura knew taking him away wouldn't be easy. Returning to reality, she told Dogok they should eat first and then discuss marriage. But Dogok, clearly irritated, scratched his neck and said he wasn't interested in doing either. Smiling and looking into his eyes, Ura insisted she wanted a wedding. He averted his gaze, confused by her persistence. Turning back to her, he explained awkwardly that he already had a girlfriend. Surprised, Ura asked if he was truly going to marry her sister. Laughing, Dog folded his arms and pointed out that Ura was now trying to stop him. Suddenly, Ura began shouting across the floor that Yu had someone else, claiming her sister was only using Dogu for revenge. Taken aback, Dogu asked if Ura really believed that, if he didn't marry U, she should be the next option. The girl hadn't expected such a response, and looked at him with horror as the crowd in the building stared. Dogok, with a slight smirk, told Ura that he admired her boldness. He glanced at his watch, apologized, and added that he didn't have time to listen to Ura's tales. Without hesitation, he moved toward the exit, saying he had to leave. Ura quickly turned, trying to stop him, but Sudok interrupted, stating that he already had someone he was meeting for lunch. Curious, she asked who it was. He paused and, with a smile, asked if she truly didn't know. Then, turning back to her, he said he was going to have lunch with someone who often had trouble eating. The scene shifts back a few hours to the WJ retail estate, where Yu had just woken up, startled by an early phone call. Sleepily, she reached for her phone, struggling to identify the caller. Her eyes suddenly widened in shock. A picture of her kissing Dogu had been sent to her, with a message asking if it was a good photo. The sender casually mentioned that her brother was preparing a ring, and they had helped him a little. Yu immediately jumped up, trying to piece together the events of the previous night, recalling how Dogok had proposed and kissed her. Covering her mouth, she realized that he had orchestrated the whole thing in advance. The action then moved to Dogok's building, where Sadhu was heading to a meeting, her thoughts consumed by the morning's events. She tried to reassure herself that this was just business and that there must have been a reason for his proposal. It didn't matter who started it. Business was business. As she lost herself in these thoughts, someone called out her name. She looked up to see Seok, her ex-husband, surprised to see her. Yu wasn't thrilled by this encounter and didn't want to engage, so she lowered her head and walked past him. Zor quickly grabbed her arm, asking if she had come to meet Direct Sol and whether they were truly getting married. Annoyed, U pulled her hand away and confirmed it. Sol, frustrated, began shouting, demanding to know what had happened to her. U laughed bitterly, telling him it didn't matter. She already knew Sol had been in love with Ura. Sol was shocked by her words, unable to comprehend how she knew, but Yu expected this reaction and, with little hope in her expression, told him to go talk to Ura. She didn't want him anywhere near her. As she walked away, Seok, still in shock, remarked that Yu had changed. Yu turned and replied that she hadn't changed at all. Seok, however, who had felt nothing from the beginning and was only now trying to fix things, was the one who had changed. Seok was dumbfounded and had no idea how Yu knew all this. He recalled the moment after Yu had left him, telling him that their marriage was over. His grandfather couldn't believe it, questioning Seok repeatedly. A frustrated Seok tried to explain but couldn't finish before his grandfather's hand shot out and struck him across the face, hard. "You're nothing," the old man spat, angry that Seok couldn't hold on to Yu. He asked if dissolving the marriage was all Seok could do. The family was horrified, especially Seok's mother, who tearfully asked what they would do now with the deposit for the store already paid. She pounced on him, demanding answers. Just then, Seok's sister burst in, asking what would happen to her fancy bag and GG dress. The family's overwhelming expectations fell heavily on Seok's shoulders, with everyone urging him to win Yu back at any cost. Seok, staring down at the floor, tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong and when it had all fallen apart. The scene shifts again, and now Seok is outside, talking with Ura. She casually mentioned that Seok was like family to her, and he smiled, feeling encouraged. Ura held his hand and spoke of how great it would be if they became one family. Confused, Seok agreed, only for Ura to suggest that they could become a family if he married her sister. Seok, bewildered, asked what her sister had to do with it. Ura held his hand tighter and, surprised, asked, "Don't you want to marry Ura?" Seok was taken aback. This girl, who had been sweet-talking him and hanging out with him, was now suggesting he marry her sister. Nevertheless, after a moment of contemplation, Seok turned away and gravely agreed to marry Ura. Overjoyed, began praising him, calling him the best. Seok, meanwhile, realized he had no choice but to move closer to Ura's family. His thoughts drifted back to that night of confession, the night he had spent with Ura. Looking out the window, she talked about how she couldn't sleep in the same bed as another person. She mentioned how sharing a room or a bed with anyone made her uncomfortable. Her boyfriend smiled and reassured her that he was fine with it. He still wanted to be with her. As he stared at the floor, he realized that things had turned out just as Yu had said. Maybe it was for the best, though there was one thing that continued to stress him out. One afternoon, Ura urgently called Seo, asking him to come over as soon as possible. When she got into the car, Seo immediately asked her what had happened and why she needed him so suddenly. Without much thought, Ura started shouting that Yu was going to marry Dog Ao. Grabbing Seo by his jacket, she begged him for help, saying that he was on her side. She tearfully confessed that she knew Yu still cared about her, and even more, she believed Yu liked her too. Ura desperately asked Seo to bring Yu back. Disheartened, Seo looked down and asked if Ura would marry Dogok if Yu didn't return. Ura sighed heavily, tears welling up in her eyes, and said that she would have to, because it was all for the family business. Anne, from what Seo did when she arrived, asked why she was pretending that Dogok didn't like her. He started shouting, telling her that she needed Dogok and he could see it clearly. Sighing heavily again, Seo realized he had no other choice. Reluctantly, he agreed to help and said he would try to convince Yu to come back to her. Ura's expression instantly changed from desperation to joy, and she thanked him profusely. As Seo watched her happiness, he thought to himself that if this was the only way to make her happy, then so be it. The scene shifted to the hospital. It was a sunny, bright day, perfect for Yu to get her test results. She had just left the building, holding an envelope with the results inside. Unable to wait any longer, she stopped and opened it. As her eyes scanned the paper, her expression shifted from curiosity to shock. It revealed that Annan, the man she came to see, was 99.9% confirmed to be her biological father. Yu dropped the envelope, struggling to process the news. How could this have happened? Suddenly, it hit her. The unpleasant woman, Jiang Hai, must have known all along. Even her wool-covered life had been a forgery, a complete fraud. Yu looked up at the sky and laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her face. It hurt to realize that she would only learn about her real father's identity after his death. Later, Yu found herself standing in front of her house. The journey home had been difficult, and she was emotionally drained. As she reached for her keys, someone called out to her from behind. It was her ex-husband Seo's unpleasant relatives. They forced smiles, pretending to care about her well-being. Yu looked at them with disdain and asked what they wanted. Seo's mother began speaking, hesitantly, bringing up the topic of the marriage dissolution. She stumbled over her words, but eventually said they had come because they were worried. Seo stood emotionless as the woman continued pestering her with questions, trying to understand if Yu and Seo had fought. When the woman suggested they should simply ignore the rumors, her daughter Se chimed in, saying, "All couples fight before they get married." Yu, already irritated by their presence, was growing increasingly stressed. Suddenly, Se approached her and took her hand, suggesting they all go out to eat together to lift her mood. Without a second thought, Yu yanked her hand away and made it clear that she had no intention of going anywhere with them. Feeling cornered, Seo's mother then mentioned something about a contract. She hesitated but eventually blurted out that she was considering returning it, and, in fact, had taken out a loan. She sighed and said that everything was falling apart at the worst possible time. Yu, without any emotion, firmly said no and advised the woman to get a job. Turning away, she declared the conversation over and said there was nothing more to discuss. Just as Yu started walking away, the woman suddenly grabbed her arm and pleaded, asking if Yu wanted her to apologize. She begged Yu to reconsider the marriage, insisting that, although she didn't know what had happened between them, not all hope was lost. Looking at her ex-husband's family, U calmly stated that they no longer had anything to do with her. With that, she turned towards the door and began unlocking it. As a final statement, she made it clear that she had no intention of marrying Seok. Seok's mother, seemingly resigned, nodded and said she understood, but she hoped their promise still stood. U turned around, bewildered, as the woman, now on her knees, continued to plead. She promised she would give everything back, if only U would reconsider. U, tired of the theatrics, asked directly how the woman planned to return the money. Seok's mother, embarrassed, looked away, unable to answer. U sighed, telling them that once again they shouldn't count on her. Turning around, she told them to talk to her son instead. Her dishevelled woman lowered her head, and Se, horrified, asked her mother what they should do next. Suddenly, Seok's mum snapped. Grinding her teeth, she lunged at U, grabbing her by the hair and dragging her forward. The woman unleashed a tirade, bitterly complaining that U didn't even remember her birthday. She ranted that U was an ill-mannered girl who didn't know basic etiquette. U tried to break free but couldn't. Then she noticed something. A security camera. Realizing they were now out of frame, U knew she had to move. Slowly she started backing up, inch by inch, until she was back in view. Se, witnessing the scene, stepped between her mother and U, trying to stop the chaos. But Seok's mother was beyond reason. At the last moment, she swung her arm wildly. There was a tense silence as her hand connected with Yu's face. The woman stood there, satisfied, while Yu stared at her, unfazed. Rather than reacting with anger, Yu began to laugh. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Lifting her hair to reveal the forming bruise, Yu asked the woman and Se if they realized what had just happened. Her expression shifted, becoming sharper and more confident, as she coldly stated that physical assault had just occurred. Seok's mum, still fuming, demanded to know what Yu was talking about. But before she could finish, Se called out to her mother, pointing upwards. There, hanging above them, was a camera. Se tried to step away, but then came over quickly. She smirked, while being unsteady. "We are in the frame," she said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "It means I'll have fun with this now." Se tried to take them to the police. Panic set in as Se frantically begged U to forget the incident. Se tried pulling her mother towards the door, urging her to leave. Wu exhaled, relieved. This nightmare was finally over. Just as she reached the doorstep, a man appeared, blocking her way. He asked how she was doing. Wu, slightly taken aback, asked who had sent him. Was it Grandpa? The man silently nodded. Yu then asked how her grandfather was doing, and the bodyguard replied that he was doing much better. Wu hesitated before asking if he would be able to travel to Seoul. The bodyguard said he wasn't sure. As Yu walked past him, the man suddenly turned and asked if it was true that Yu was getting married. Yu, surprised by the question, hesitated, but then confirmed it. The man looked at her, expressionless, and remarked that he hoped the man she was marrying was a worthy replacement for Seok. Yu was puzzled by his words, recalling the strange things he had said before, like the time he caught her when she was about to fall, or the moment he advised her to stay home if she truly wanted revenge. Then she remembered the day of her father's death. That moment in the car, when she saw a missed call from Jwan-on, wondering why he had called her in the first place. The scene shifted to a small but charming restaurant. Dogu entered and was greeted warmly by his family, who were already gathered there. His mother beamed, proudly mentioning that she never dreamed her son would finally find a good bride. Dogu smiled, but quickly changed the subject, saying there was something he wanted for himself. As Dogu's sister joined the conversation, the mood shifted. She teased him about going crazy over this girl he liked. Dogu interrupted, starting to tell his story even though his family already knew quite a bit about the girl. His mother frowned and mentioned that she had heard Oo wasn't exactly a decent girl, asking if she was an orphan. Dogok, irritated, picked up his glass and thought to himself that Oo was far from someone to be talked about like that. Abruptly, his mother slammed her fist on the table, declaring that there would be no marriage with Yoo. His father, unfazed, sipped his coffee and said that Dogok could do whatever he wanted. The argument escalated, with his mother yelling, but his father calmly reminded her that Dogok's choices were his own. Dogok watched his parents quarrel, thinking back to how he had always been on his own, making decisions by himself. Finally, Dogok stood up, wishing his family a pleasant meal, and prepared to leave. Just then, Donya, his sister, excitedly announced that their older brother was arriving. The door opened, and a joyful man entered, laughing and greeting everyone. Dogok, however, was less than thrilled at his brother's arrival. The scene shifted back to WJ Retail, where Yu sat on her cozy bed, reading. Suddenly, the sound of the door opening startled her, and she jumped. Yura stood before her, explaining that Seok had arrived and was waiting for her. Yu, frustrated, said she didn't want to see him. She reminded Yu that Seok had betrayed her and demanded to know what he wanted. Ura explained that Seok had come to talk, and Yu, without hesitation, told her to send him away. There was nothing to discuss. But Ura, defiant, said she would let him in anyway. Moments later, Seok peeked in through the door and smiled. Barely containing her anger, Yu asked why he couldn't respect her wishes. She sarcastically wondered if Ura had put him up to this. Seok, surprised, remained silent, confirming her suspicions. Yu sighed, her frustration evident. Seok approached her, pleading for another chance, apologizing for the past, and promising he would never hurt her again. Bed frosty lips. But Yu, tired of his words, pulled her hand away and coldly told him to get out. Seok, devastated, fell to his knees, begging her not to marry Dogok, saying it would break his heart. Yu, baffled by his audacity, asked what he was even talking about. Seok, desperate, said he would pretend it never happened, and in that moment, proposed to her.